Okay. So look, I suggest we make a start. So first of all, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm extremely grateful for your time today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alex Benjamin. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Europe-Israel Press Association. Thank you for joining us for this timely briefing. And thank you as well for your patience, because up until last night, the situation regarding our guests was fairly fluid, and we were getting the information to you as quickly as we could, given the circumstances. So thank you for that. We meet for this briefing on a potentially pivotal day. As you all know, it's a call by South Africa's government, led by the ANC, which has a long history of support for the Palestinian cause, to the court in The Hague, ruling on immediately ending the war, and much more controversially, accusing Israel of genocide. Before I hand over to my colleague, esteemed colleague, and our Director of Strategy, Tal Rabina, to set the scenes, allow me briefly to run through a few house rules before I introduce our guests. It's always extremely useful from our point of view. If you do have any questions, I'll be opening the chat facility. If you do have any questions for our guests, or any guest in particular, please put your question in that chat along with your name and outlet, which I'll probably see anyway. It's just some of you have, for instance, forgive me, Guillaume, I have no idea what your outlet is. So if you do have a question, Guillaume from Le Figaro or wherever you're from would be extremely
Le Figaro.
Voilà. Wasn't that a great guess, David? So with that said, and we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can. If some of the questions are duplicated, I'm sure you'll understand. And we'll try and get as many questions of yours answered as possible. So on this briefing on the latest developments in the war against Hamas and genocide accusations, we have with us today, we're very proud to have with us today the following guests: Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, retired now, a former IDF spokesperson; Professor Uzi Rabi, the director of the Dayan Center for Middle East Studies in Israel; Professor Yann Jurovics is the leading specialist of crimes against humanity and crimes of genocide. And joining us very, very shortly will be Ambassador Francois Zimeray, the founder of the Alliance of Lawyers for Human Rights. So with all of that said, I'm going to hand over to my man in the hot seat, Tal Rabina, who is going to be taking this forward. Of course, I'll be in the background managing the chat facilities, and I'm sure we'll be in touch thereafter. So without further ado, dear Tal, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you all for spending the time this morning with us. As Alex mentioned, literally this very moment, the procedure in Hague is beginning. So I would like, before everything else, to go straight to you, Professor Jurovics. And maybe my first question would be, is it a political affair or really a legal one?
To my point of view, hi to everyone, and thank you for your question. But you know, I'm here as a legal expert, so the only thing I can tell you is when there is such a case at the ICJ, it is mainly under the legal jurisdiction of the court. So for my field, it's a legal affair, and that's it. Nothing else. We're not supposed to go deeper in the political views of South Africa or any involvement that will be set up by any other organization. It's not what we got to do when we go to court. I used to work for that court. Some of the judges are still I'm still related to them, and we know the way it goes. We know, and the UN Charter says specifically that the court is supposed to try only the legal part on the case of the case.
So could you please elaborate for those of us who are not that well informed, how is the procedure is going to be handled?
So first, South Africa is requesting some provisional measures. That is today. Such measures could be taken, could be decided by the court within like 10, 20 days. Thereafter, it will take 2 more years, and I'm talking about years, 2 years, just for the court to state if it has jurisdiction on the case, and then 2 more years to conclude on the merits. So that means we're not here today to decide if there is a genocide or not. If we know all the legal experts know for sure there is no genocide there. I'm not saying that the Israeli government or the Israeli army will not be found guilty of something else in front of another jurisdiction. It's not the point. The point here is only a dispute related to the Genocide Convention. So the court has to decide if prima facie there is a reason to start considering discussing the content of the convention between South Africa and Israel. If so, it will decide it has jurisdiction on the case. That's in 2 years. And most likely, not to turn its back to the world, the judges will order provisional measures. That does not make anyone guilty. It's just measures to prevent any irreparable prejudice. So in the same case, let's say Gambia versus Burma, the court requested the Burmese army to cease fire. That's it. So, and same thing in Russia versus Ukraine. Ceasefire, humanitarian help, and also most likely it will ask Israel to give some report every 6 months to the court in the pending time.
In the last cases you just mentioned, was the verdict, so to speak, was forced, or it was just more of a declaration?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
I'm asking whether in the few cases you just mentioned,
yeah,
that came in front of the ICC before, were the verdict enforced, or was it just more of a declaration?
We do not have you mean the verdict on the provisional measures?
Yes, yes.
Oh, not really. No, I would say no. I would say that some parts of it where some measures were set by the government in Burma, and that's it. Regarding Russia, nothing, and that's it. You know, the Article 94 of the UN Charter says that if an order of the court is not followed by any party, the Security Council can enforce it. And I have to remind you that the Security Council is the only committee that has a power to force states. That's the only one. And I guess you all know that the Security Council is not going to order to adopt any resolution against Israel so far.
So thank you. So far at that point, I'm welcoming any question from our friends and colleagues, the journalists. Please use the chat facility. And until you will have more questions, and before we get back to you, Professor Jurovics, may I go to Lieutenant Colonel retired Jonathan Conricus, and dealing with this subject. Maybe you can, even before stating the current situation in the different fronts in Israel, in Gaza, and up north with the Hezbollah, maybe you can just address this subject and just tell us, is the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, making any special procedures in order not to harm uninvolved people?
Yes, thank you, Tal. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Conricus. I'm a lieutenant colonel in reserves. My previous assignment in the IDF, which I completed 2.5 years ago, was the international spokesperson. And since October the 7th, up until a few days ago, I have been in a reserve position as a spokesperson. The situation on the ground today is that Israel is fighting on 2 very active fronts and 3 additional fronts that there are significant threats against Israeli civilians. We're fighting under the obligation to defend our sovereignty and our civilians against various attacks. The most important one was on October the 7th, but Hamas and the Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah have been attacking Israel ever since. And that is the context that in which we find ourselves, defending our civilians and defending our sovereignty against multiple attacks aimed at our civilians. All of the activities of our enemies are blatant violations of international law, both failure to use distinction between combatant and non-combatant, and all of our enemies are firing at our centers of population indiscriminately. The purpose of the operations against our population, according to the words that Hamas leaders have said themselves before October the 7th and after October the 7th, is to conduct genocide against Israelis. And I find the whole situation here quite absurd, that Israel is being dragged to court in order to defend itself against such scandalous allegations, when in fact our enemies are stating clearly time and time again, senior Hamas officials are saying that they will do October 7 again and again and again if they're able to do so, and that their final intention is to abolish Jews in Israel and the state of Israel. And that needs to be front and center of each and every conversation that is conducted regarding the fighting, why we fight, whom we are fighting, and why it is absolutely necessary to completely dismantle any military capabilities that are within the Gaza Strip. That's the framework. Now, of course, the IDF, as a military of a sovereign democratic country with a sound legal system, with an independent legal advisory within the IDF, the Military Advocate General, operates according to the laws of armed conflict. Our officers, our commanders are trained according to the laws of armed conflict. They are trained and educated. Our officers and soldiers are trained to operate according to the key principles of international humanitarian law, or the law of armed conflict, to apply distinction, to distinguish between combatant and non-combatant, and to strike the combatants, to operate according to military necessity and use military force only where there is necessity to do so. And I will give examples of such cases of everything that I say. And of course, to use proportionality, which means not to count bodies. Hamas butchered 900 Israeli civilians on the 7th of October, so now we're going to wantonly execute 900 Palestinians. No, that is not how proportionality works. Proportionality is in proportion to the military necessity and the military aim of any specific military operation. And I have many examples of attacks that the IDF planned and was at the cusp of executing, where on the balance was proportionality between achieving a military aim, an important one, and on this other side of the equation, non-combatants that it was assessed that they would have been killed or wounded, and the strike was called off, or the strike was diverted, cancelled, or postponed, because the proportionality between the military objective and the non-combatants that would have been killed was not good enough and strong enough and didn't warrant military action. And therefore, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of cases where we have aborted military activity intended for a clear military purpose in order to preserve human life. The IDF...
If I may ask, today the tribunal is international. I wonder whether the IDF has a benchmark to compare, to see how other military forces in the world are working when it comes to such questions.
Yeah, so there are various think tanks and various organizations around the world who do compare urban warfare since the Second World War, modern times of urban warfare. And I could first and foremost say, when we speak about the number of casualties, which has been often quoted, including by many of the participants on this call, I would like to say that the numbers that are produced by Hamas are inherently incorrect and full of inaccuracies, falsifications, and a deliberate attempt to inflate the number of civilians killed and to disguise and minimize the amount of combatants killed. And I'll give a few examples. If you look at video footage disseminated by Hamas from October the 7th and until today, and specifically since the Israeli ground operation started in northern Gaza, you will see that in the videos that Hamas releases themselves, all of the Hamas combatants are dressed in civilian clothes. They wear civilian shoes and civilian clothing. They are not in uniform. Uniform is obviously something that is used for parades and propaganda videos for Hamas, not for fighting. And once Hamas operatives are killed, combatants are killed on the battlefield, which is usually what happens after they try to attack Israeli troops, they look like civilians. And they are then added to the tally of so-called civilian casualties. And if you spend some time looking at the progression of numbers over the days reported by the Hamas Ministry of Health in Gaza, you will find many inaccuracies and you will find many things that with only a small level of analysis would lead you to seriously doubt the veracity of those numbers. Why do I speak about those numbers? Because they, unfortunately, are the benchmark numbers that so many people around the world, including the South African government, are using in order to level baseless claims against Israel. And I won't even repeat their claims. And I speak about these numbers because even when you compare these false and inflated numbers, the ratio between non-combatants, somebody isn't on mute, thank you. The ratio between non-combatant and enemy combatant killed by the IDF is still a ratio that is far better than any ratio achieved by other militaries fighting in similar conditions, easier conditions, similar conditions in the last 20 years. And I am referring to Mosul, Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, and other locations where Western militaries have fought against terrorist organizations or non-state actors or militant groups. None of them had the amount of weapons that Hamas had. None of them had the elaborate infrastructure of tunnels that Hamas had, and none of them were as embedded within the civilian population as Hamas is in Gaza. So the challenge that Israel faces is a very, very significant one. And despite that, the number of casualties, the ratio between combatant and non-combatant, in many cases around the world, in urban terrain, it's 1 to 9. 1 combatant killed to 9 non-combatant killed. And in this case, we're talking about, according to Israeli figures, we assess that in northern Gaza alone, the IDF was able to take out more than 8,000 enemy combatants. Now, even if you use the Hamas numbers, which are false and conflated, but even if you use their numbers, you will find that the ratio, of course, every life lost is sad and regrettable, but at the end of the day, this unfortunately is the reality of fighting in urban terrain, densely populated urban terrain, where an enemy uses civilians as human shields, and that is exactly what Hamas does by strategy and by design. The fact of the matter is that civilians get killed, sadly, but the ratio here is very important, and I think it is a proof of not only the legal intentions, but also on the activities on the ground by the IDF, in the air and on the ground, which try, to the greatest extent possible, to distinguish between combatant and non-combatant and strike the combatants only.
Thank you, Jonathan. Before we get back to you, I see that Pedro from Spain has a question. Pedro, would you please unmute yourself? You're not unmuted, Pedro.
Can I say something in the meantime?
I think his question is addressed to you, so maybe we'll just take the question and of course,
so if that is
for you.
That's the question in the chat. So before that,
Pedro, are you with us? No, we cannot hear you. So okay, Professor Jurovics, please go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to thank Mr. Kornikus, but Mr. Kornikus, you're already pleading and you are so much involved. That's very interesting to listen to you. But I have to tell you, it's not the case. The case here, and I have no doubt that Israel most of the time is respecting international humanitarian law. But never ever forget that here today, we are discussing the request of South Africa regarding only genocide. We have no the court will not go that far. It does not have jurisdiction to fish over there, to check if Israel is respecting or not respecting international humanitarian law. This court has only jurisdiction when states agree on that jurisdiction. And Israel gave his agreement by ratifying the Genocide Convention. Article 9 of the convention gives jurisdiction to the court. That's it, nothing more. So we should not, I think it's a matter of strategy. If you want to be still defending Israel, do not go that deep in, today, or in front of that jurisdiction.
I would ask you the question that Pedro put on the chat, because we cannot overcome the unmuting the facility. And he is asking, can the court decide today or tomorrow if there is a case or not? And if this is the sentence, the affair is really over?
So today, today's the hearings. Within 10 to 20 days, most likely 15, the court will decide only on provisional measures. That's it. Nothing else. It will not say there is genocide. It will not say there is a dispute. It's just saying it will, the maximum will be there might be a case, and in the meantime, we decide provisional measures. That's it. That we have to wait 2 more years before the court will maybe say that it will deal with the case. And maybe in 2 years, and most likely, in 2 years, the court will deny its own jurisdiction on that case.
Could you please elaborate we know there are a lot of
I see where you go there. The court will deny its jurisdiction because there is no genocide. Genocide is there are many legal elements, and each element is so difficult to prove. Like you need Article 2 of the convention states that you need an intent to destroy a national group as such. So the group must be aimed at. It must be a biological destruction. As such, so that means that for Israel to be condemned for genocide, you must prove that Israel has the intent to destroy the group, not to get the territory, not for economic reasons, just because they exist. And
so the intention is a principle.
that's the key element of genocide. That's the key legal element. Like in Bosnia, there was no genocide because the borders were open for the Muslims to live. Even if they were killed on the way, even if they were deported or harmed, there was no genocide. In Rwanda in 1994, the government decided to shut the borders just to get what we call a final solution. The final solution, that's the genocide.
Thank
Here,
you. We have
Gaza,
yeah.
Gaza, there is no such thing, and everybody knows it, right? Even if they most likely there are crimes, even crimes committed by Israeli soldiers. That's always possible. But the policy is not to get rid, to destroy the Palestinian group.
Thank you. I would like to give our friends the chance to ask as many questions as they wish. Markus Becker, you have your hand up, please.
Yes. Hi, Markus Becker with Der Spiegel. Yeah, I have a question for the Colonel. When you talked about the numbers which you called inflated, well, presumably those numbers are widely used, I think, even by international organizations, because when you look at the destruction in Gaza, these numbers seem to be rather plausible for some people, obviously. So, if you are saying that these numbers are inflated and inaccurate, do you have numbers which are more accurate?
Yeah, Marcus, thank you for your question. I think you touch on a very important subject, and unfortunately, I will be critical of my own organization and country, and I think that Israel should have been providing numbers from day one about the amount of non-combatants and combatants killed at the best of our, according to the best of our understanding. Unfortunately, that was not done, and Hamas, understanding fully well with very important strategic foresight that the battle of the narrative and public opinion and international politics will be about casualties, about legal allegations, sham legal allegations like the one that we are discussing now. They will be about numbers, and they will be about damage to infrastructure and civilians killed. And Hamas got ahead of that and started counting, inflating numbers. And if you look on my Twitter account, the pinned tweet is a quick and interesting analysis done by a civilian. He's not even, I don't think he's a journalist, who did an analysis of the numbers that you spoke about, international organizations, right? That gives credibility to these numbers, that the UN uses the numbers. And you can look that a tweeter named Eisenberg, he analyzed the reports provided by UN organizations in Gaza, the humanitarian office, and he found tremendous inaccuracies and things that simply don't make sense in the numbers that UN institutions disseminated based on Hamas numbers. That in itself, for me, if I was a serious journalist or an editor, would cause me to pause and say, well, these numbers don't look really kosher. I think that there's something wrong with this, and I have doubts about the veracity of these numbers. But for many people, it's enough that there's a number out from a so-called official organization in Gaza, never mind that it's run by a terrorist organization that is on a mission to conduct genocide of Jews. But let's use those numbers. And sadly, Israel took us too long to present numbers of enemy combatants killed. Now we have said officially on the record that we are speaking about 8,000 killed in northern Gaza. And of course, as time goes by, it takes a lot of time and a lot of resources, and we want to be sure about the information that we share. It takes time, and then eventually, I think that the State of Israel will have its official estimate of combatants and non-combatants killed. I don't know how many people will take it and listen to it, but I think Israel will do it. I see questions here by Elliot Chapman. I'll address just, Tal, you want me to address that question?
Let's have Elliot ask his question, because I don't know if everybody are following the chat. Elliot, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes, I
very
can.
good.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, thanks very much, everyone. It's kind of three questions really to do with casualty reporting and that kind of thing. So the first question is, how many? You've stated 8,000 in the north. How many remain then, based on your estimates of Hamas and other militant groups there? And then in the south, how many are we talking about remaining there as well for the sort of next phases of the conflict? And then there's sort of a third piece, which is not related to numbers, but sort of in the long term, looking at Hamas's military capabilities, they tend to be generated from a lot of civilian technologies. You know, the IDF's been releasing imagery of factories that are being used to make rockets and mortar shells and that kind of thing. Those are being manufactured with pretty much civilian technology. So what's the IDF's strategy for keeping those kind of capabilities degraded in the long term? Thanks.
Yeah. So Tal, I will thank you for your question, Elliot. Tal, I'll address the questions. If you want, I can address the third one as well.
Go ahead, of course.
It may deviate a little bit from the topic of the discussion, but I'll try to be short.
We are here, Jonathan, to give our colleagues the answers. So whatever you can deliver will be welcome.
Great. So the original assessed combat strength in terms of combatants, Hamas combatants going into this war was around 30,000, 30. Total strength, not all of them prime fighters, not all of them very well and very fit and capable of fighting, but all wall to wall, about 30,000 combat strength of Hamas in Gaza. We have, as I said, we assessed that we have killed more than 8,000 in northern Gaza. I have still not seen an official IDF estimate on southern Gaza, but the IDF is quite hard at work there as well. And of course, in general, we know from other conflicts and from ourselves as well, there's usually a 1-to-3 or 1-to-4 ratio of killed versus wounded. So when you take 8 and multiply it by 3 or 4, we're getting near affecting almost all of Hamas's combat capabilities in terms of numbers. From an organizational point of view, and I cannot answer the second question. I don't know how many are left in the south. There's very few left in the north, not very significant numbers in small formations or as individuals. Many of them, according to the information that we have hidden their weapons and have made efforts to embed themselves back into civil society. Again, in their civilian clothes, they just put down their AK-47 and their RPG, and now they are a young Gazan, a 21-year-old or 17-year-old Gazan who will be addressed by UNRWA and by UN entities as a civilian. Even if he, of course, for 2.5 months was busy fighting Israel, and even if he participated in the October 7 massacre. So I don't know the answer to the second, but I can say that we are making good progress on degrading enemy capabilities significantly in the north. 11 out of 12 Hamas battalions in the north have been almost totally degraded and do not have fighting capabilities to actively conduct operations against the IDF in an organizational manner. And in the south, Hamas still retains both administrative and military capabilities. The IDF is dismantling and attacking the infrastructure and the personnel and the tunnels and hunting leaders. All of that is happening at once. And regarding your third question, I'll speak about a few parts of the answer. One is to systematically go after all of the known, previously known, and the newly known and exposed centers of production of Hamas, and simply to destroy them, underground, above ground, wherever they are, to dismantle the infrastructure and the network. Second is to go after the personnel, the key engineers, and those who lead the efforts, who are the masterminds behind this industry, to take them out. Third is to attack the supply of money coming in from Turkey, from Gulf states, from Iran, of course, to attack the infrastructure that provides funding to Hamas. Fourth thing would be to attack and make it difficult for Hamas to use humanitarian aid, the generous, lavish humanitarian aid that the world so happily pours into Gaza, which has been abused by Hamas for years. More than a decade, Hamas has been taking international humanitarian aid designed to build buildings and roads and hospitals and schools and mosques, and building tunnels, using the cement and the construction material to build tunnels and military infrastructure. So there will be a mechanism in place to make sure that that is more difficult. And fifth, very, very important, to cut the tunnels. And here I'm preempting a little bit. I'm loading the, the carriage before the horse, but because we're not quite there yet, but we will be there, because this conflict cannot end, and there will not be stability and quiet, and hopefully, inshallah, someday in the future, peace in the southern part of Israel and in Gaza, without Israel making sure that additional weapons do not continue to come in to Gaza. And the way that they come in is through tunnels that go from Egypt into the Gaza Strip. And they need to be blocked and dismantled. And there needs to be a permanent obstacle there that makes it impossible or extremely difficult and cumbersome for weapons to come into Gaza. Wherever our troops go, first of all, we saw the massive amounts of weapons that Hamas terrorists took with them on October the 7th as they went on their killing spree inside Israel. They brought weapons that indicated that their intention was to stay in Israel for weeks, to conduct defensive warfare, to take control of communities and then defend themselves using explosives and missiles and rockets. But every place we go inside Gaza, we find tremendous amounts of weaponry, standard weaponry from Iran, from China, from Korea, things that have been brought from Italy, like mines, things that have been copied of Austrian weapons, and many other things that are exposed. And of course, all of these weapons came in through tunnels from Egypt. So to conclude the answer, various efforts are ongoing, first to dismantle their infrastructure, then to hit those that are the backbone of their research and development and their engineering, money, and then to make sure that it will be difficult to get anything illegal, any weapons into Gaza at the day that this war ends.
Thank you, Jonathan. And just before we're going to Professor Uzi Rabi from Dayan Center of the Tel Aviv University, Lieutenant Colonel Konrikus, we're talking about all kinds of claims, and one of them that I guess are very interesting to our colleagues are the claims that Israel is killing journalists. Actually, I'm asking it because yesterday there was such a claim that Israel killed 2 journalists. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, Israel does not intentionally kill journalists, full stop. Israel has no intention to do so. Israel does not try to kill journalists. Israel, on the contrary, whenever Israel knows about the presence of journalists, accredited journalists, then we take measures in order not to strike in those areas. And I have many examples of me, myself, being involved personally in getting locations from internationally accredited journalists who were in northern Gaza, giving us the location of their offices or their temporary whereabouts, and then me and my staff relaying that information to the headquarters, the different units that were doing the targeting process, and making sure that those locations are not struck until the journalists are able to evacuate. And we continue to distinguish between combatant and non-combatant, and we make efforts not to strike journalists. And to claim anything else, I think, is false, misleading, and of course political propaganda by people who are against Israel and are trying to be supportive of Hamas.
They were giving two specific names.
I will go further and say that that Israel exposed two so-called journalists that were killed. Are actually, one of them was a member of Hamas and the other one was a member of the Islamic Jihad. They claim to be journalists and they operate drones and they do other things that are related to taking photographs and reporting, but they are also part of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, and that's not only us saying so. These are Hamas and Islamic Jihad documents that were found by Israel on the battlefield, and then, of course, cross-referenced and checked. And we found out, not to our surprise, that these two so-called journalists, one of them is, his name is Mabhouch, and the first one, I don't remember his name, but they were exposed yesterday. And if you want to know the details, you can check out the IDF's Twitter account, or X, and you can see the names and the details of all of them, including the original Hamas and Islamic Jihad documents, where it says what their role was in Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. So you can check that out. They are not the exception here. They are what we have been seeing for so long, that there are propagandists paid by Hamas, right? That instead of being journalists are doing journalistic work for the purpose of propaganda, and they are members, active members of terrorist organizations. We saw that on October the 7th with tremendous amount of Western accredited stringers and so-called journalists working for AP, for the New York Times, for BBC, for the Washington Post, for CNN, Palestinians who live in Gaza, who are accredited so-called international journalists, who participated in going into Israel. They crossed the border between Gaza and Israel, and they were there taking pictures, riding on Hamas motorcycles, chanting in joy, and documenting what was going on, totally unallowed, violating Israeli sovereignty. They had no right or business being in Israel, crossing from Gaza. I'm not saying here that they were part of the attack and that necessarily they were collaborators, but I can say that the journalists or the Palestinians who work for these organizations are extremely substandard. Give that as it is. I want to be very clear. We, the IDF and Israel, do not target journalists. We do not target civilians. And to claim so is false and misleading. And contrary to that, the ones that are using journalists and using and applying violence and terror and intimidation on international journalists and stringers in Gaza is, of course, Hamas. That is hugely underreported in international media, sadly. And that is why most of the information that comes out of Gaza, up until perhaps a few weeks ago, everything was cleared and approved by Hamas. And if it isn't to Hamas's liking, then the Palestinian stringer who generated the information will have problems with Hamas. He will be warned once, and then the second time there will be retribution against him or his family. And we have seen this dozens of times, hundreds of times in the past. And I have heard personally journalists, international journalists from AP and from AFP and the New York Times saying that, you know, what can we do? I have a stringer in Gaza, and if he reports things that Hamas doesn't like, then his life is threatened. So what can he say? How can he go and take pictures of Hamas operatives using UNRWA schools for fighting? Because then he'll be in trouble. To that, my response is, well, that's his job, isn't it? If he's a journalist and if he's there to expose the situation on the ground and inform the world of reality, then he should be doing that. And if you can't get that to work, then you at least should have the integrity of saying our staff in Gaza is not able to document reality. We are not able to get close to Hamas positions. We are not able to film Hamas in action, firing rockets from schools, building bombs in mosques, or using civilians as human shields. But that is not the case. And when it comes to journalists, I think that a lot is left wanting when it comes to international coverage of what's happening in Gaza.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And now we are very happy to welcome Professor Uzi Rabi, Director of the Dayan Center for Middle East Studies at Tel Aviv University. Welcome, Professor Rabi. As you know, we started this Zoom meeting with the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, that is handling right now as we speak. I would like to ask you, before getting into the area affairs, how does such a thing encourage the partners, the players here in the Middle East?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Tal, first of all, and I am very pleased to be here. With regard to the Hague, I think that what Israel should do is come with full force. Basically, this is also an opportunity to make sure that all other members there and the whole world would definitely be keenly aware of what happened on the 7th of October. Thereafter, actually, use the regular things by which to show that Israel is not only not coming up with what we call genocide practices, but definitely is very, very careful and in parallel or comparison to the performances of other armies in such cases. Israel actually is definitely coming up with something that must be treated in a totally different way. I see the challenge. This court cannot take kind of an immediate decision, but if to go to the negative, let's say, a procedure it could implement is just to be much more critic about Israel, harming its eroding legitimacy, trying to have more and more states in the world actually harming Israel when it comes to whatever layers actually we talk about, state, geopolitics, support, and all other things. I don't think it would go there. And what I would say is that Israel should just capitalize on that, as I said before, and bring in her voice in kind of a very clear way. I do hope still that the 7th of October was sort of a watershed also when it comes to Israel in the Middle East, Israel in the world. And this, in my opinion, is just a stepping stone in kind of a long march by which Israel should come up with a different campaign, which should be and must be very, very, I would say, penetrating, effective, as to make sure that the whole picture is well known to the other players.
So let's talk about the other players. Maybe you can elaborate a bit about those who are more behind the scenes. What are the interests of the different players? What do you anticipate to be the next step, even before we will be able to talk about the day after?
Well, Tal, what I think should be emphasized as a point of departure to our discussion is that this is not a mano-a-mano game, Israel versus Hamas or Gaza. When you look actually at the surroundings or the environment, you come to understand that Gaza, Hamas, even if a Sunni player, is tightly related to what is being named and termed by the let us say, problematic guys in the Middle East. This is called محور المقاومة in Arabic, which is the axis of muqawama. Now, what is muqawama? Muqawama is resistance, which is kind of a term being used by both Hamas, Hezbollah, and others, and Iran, the patron, in order to, epitomize the whole thing by which they see the region and beyond. Basically, this is an anti-American, anti-Western axis, and Israel is a foe first and foremost because it is a byproduct of this axis, the Western axis. And basically, when you fight Israel, you fight what they say, the Western world, the free world, and all these notions and values that are in kind of a controversy when it comes to these players. Now, what Iran has done here, and Iran should be looked at as an octopus. Tehran is an octopus. The arms, as everybody knows, and this is kind of a project of 40 years, not less than that. The guy who orchestrated this was Haj Qasem Soleimani, which was the commander of the Quds force, Jerusalem force of the Revolutionary Guards. Basically, the mechanism is pretty clear. When you have a dwindling Arab state, dwindling Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and so on, a state which is in a chaotic situation, witnessing a bloody civil war, what Iran is highly needed in that kind of a situation is to have a Shiite component in that weak state, and Iran would actually nurture it, support it, turn it into its own proxy. And as we see these days, Iran is orchestrating the whole concert, so to speak, using Houthis, Hezbollah, Hashid Sha'bi, which is a nickname to the conglomerate of pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, pro-Iranian militias in Syria. So basically, this is kind of a golden opportunity, this whole Gaza thing, for Iran to just, practice the theater, as we say, as we said before. Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza are exception to the rule. They are Sunni clients, but the simple fact that they do sit back to Israel and could in no time wage a war against Israel, this makes them, in the eyes of Iran, worth supporting, and this is exactly what Iran is doing here. So basically, we have Iran, we have kind of a nexus in the Middle East. So if I would put, Tal, in front of us the map of the Middle East, I could definitely foster two different routes or axes. The first of which in my opinion is the, let's say, bad guys, quote unquote. This would be Iran and company. The others are Saudi Arabia first and foremost, and other Arab states that has decided to cross the Rubicon, so to speak, in terms of Middle Eastern history, politics, and tradition. Egypt, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan is a very controversial case, but all these states that I just mentioned, if you come to look deeply at what their attitude is, they would be pro-Western, anti-Iranian, anti-Hamas and Muslim brothers, and for them, Israel is not necessarily an enemy, but rather a partner for many things. This would be the second axis. So basically,
what we know is the saying that in the Middle East, the enemy of my enemy is a friend of mine.
Can be my friend. And for many other reasons, actually, those states cross the Rubicon, because for them Israel is a viable and kind of a partner that should be cooperated with in order to just get sort of a deal by which you have the win-win, dimension here. And we had seen that in recent years in the aftermath of the Abraham Accords. But the bottom line for this comment or question is that the Gazan war and its results would be very telling to kind of a question around which we say, where are we Middle Easterners heading to? If Hamas is still there and Israel failed to achieve the main goal, this would be something which would be disastrous in the prestige of Israel in the Middle East, in the way actually other Arab states would look at Israel, United States, and vice versa, actually would become very, very, I would say, anxious about what Iran is up to. If Hamas is being uprooted, and I mean politically and militarily, in Gaza, this would definitely be the first sign by which to make or create some platforms in this region through which to build up kind of a new future, a new reality. This would be a point of departure. You cannot build up a better Middle East, whatsoever the word is, when you have neighbors like Hamas, Hezbollah, and others. One of them actually has performed kind of a barbaric act in the 7th of October, which would put him in line with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other notorious organizations. So
I know you are the head of the director of the Dayan Center for the Middle East Studies, but I must ask you, having said all that, don't you think the Americans understand what you just said?
I'm not sure, the Biden administration has so many considerations. It starts with domestic consumption when it comes to American politics. You have the elections actually less than a year from now on. You have here kind of a situation where America, under the Obama administration and Trump administration, was very hesitant with regard to the Middle East. That was kind of a result of the problems the Americans witnessed in both Iraq and Afghanistan. There is a fatigue when it comes to America and the Middle East. I dare say that even here, the Gazan war is being used as kind of an opportunity by the United States to make it up for itself and its allies in the region in order to build all these platforms that on the one hand are going actually to just be or become counterbalance to the Chinese penetration to the Middle East that became very, very evident in line with the American pale, I would say, presence in the Middle East in the recent years. That for one. It would be kind of a continuation of the Abraham Accords to build up sort of a platform by which all these pro-Western allies of the United States and Europe are going actually to just join together in order to create a kind of a safer Middle East, which would be kind of a bridgehead from the East to West Europe via the Middle East and the Mediterranean. And third, we should not forget what Hamas actually has come up with is those atrocities that are fully identified with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And for both Europe and the US, there is kind of, axiom, I would say. If you cannot nip it in the bud in the Middle East in the first place, you are going to have kind of implications later on in the future in other parts of the world. So in order to be prevented,
what some Israeli would say, the West is next.
yeah, in order to prevent actually for Europe and America to just witness the notion of West is next, I think that there is kind of an understanding about the end game in Gaza. There could be some, differences about the way actually different players look at what Israel is doing, about the rhythm, about the scope, about many things. But I think that for the first time, we can see kind of a unanimous stand, or kind of seeing eye to eye when it comes to both United States and Israel with regard to the end game, which is uprooting Hamas politically and militarily. Without that, we cannot think of the day after. If we are not doing that, we are on the same reality as was the 6th of October. It's exactly what we had before. Israel, in my opinion, cannot afford itself, cannot allow itself that kind of a situation, because Israel has to just come up with kind of a procedure when it comes to security, or environmental security, so to speak, by which to let many citizens get back to their homes in the north and in the south. This is a basic, this is ABC when it comes to the Zionist ethos. If we would like to start, I would say, repair the damage that had been caused, the schism between rulers and ruled in Israel, it goes through the security, a safer security, safer reality when it comes to both north and south in Israel, in order to make all these citizens, more than 100,000, getting back to their homes. If we are not going to get this, I want you to know, by any standards, this would be a defeat, which Israel is going actually to live with. And I am afraid that it would be some very sad and bad ramifications when it comes to that.
Thank you so much. We are running out of time, so if I may just ask the last question. We have Harold have a question. Harold, please unmute yourself. There is always we prefer the journalists to ask the question themselves. Go ahead, Harold. Harold Hyman. Can you unmute yourself and ask the questions? We don't hear Harold for some reason. Leonard from the Netherlands.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, please.
Yes, Leonard, I can hear you.
Okay, so let's have Leonard, and then we'll try to go back to Harold.
I'm a journalist from the Netherlands. As we speak now, there are heavy clashes in The Hague in front of the International Court between pro-Palestinians who attack pro-Israeli demonstrators. But my question is, the fact that you have the right at your side as Israel doesn't mean that other people acknowledge or recognize that you are right. They have their own facts and their own reality. And take this in account, takes Israel this in consideration, and how do you combat their reality? That's the real problem.
I fully agree with you. I think that Israel should change so many things after the 7th of October, many dimensions when it comes to in and out. But if just to refer to what you just said, one of the main things here would be kind of a different strategy on how to be there. Look at what's going on in American campuses. I mean, it's a disaster. But I think that Israel should not neglect actually all these scenes. Israel should come up with something which would be totally different than it had in the past. We know now, and we are doing this for years here in the Dayan Center in Tel Aviv University. It's not what the foreign ministry would say. It's TikTok it's Telegram, it's Instagram, it's all that stuff that has been there for years. It's Qatari money, it's so many things that made, in my opinion, and I'm sadly put it, in the West in general, when it comes to academia, when it comes to media, when it comes to so many places, you know, be absorbed by information which is based on fake news and stuff which has nothing to do with reality. Now, I won't talk about that. I would say that Israel should come up with something that would put a counterbalance to that. Either ways would be actually should be judged here, but Israel should definitely develop or foster a strategy that would be both penetrative and effective to the public opinion, whatsoever it is, in both Europe and the United States. And you are 100% right. You know, we do fight with something which is very, very big, I would say wide, and sadly, I would say that in great part is being based on not necessarily what the reality is, but what people are being fed by in kind of a very, very well concerted efforts by BDS, by pro-Palestinian groups, by I mean, we have a list of organs that are there. In my opinion, Israel should just wage a war against that, and positively put, should come up with kind of a different story, different narrative, and use all these tactics and means which are being used by the other side of the street. Yes, I agree with you, and I am not surprised.
Thank you.
By what you said, because you know, when I tried actually to just have a lecture which was in kind of a flavor or pro-Zionist flavor in NYU, in Harvard, in Princeton, in Berkeley, in some European states, or Oxford, or even Exeter in London, in England, you know, I was attacked by those pro-Palestinian protesters that had known in advance that a pro-Zionist lecture is going actually to have his words here and there, and they just whistled and they just shouted and they just made this thing actually impossible. This is just one small example that has to do with my career and my activity. But believe me, Leonard, first of all, I thank you for this comment, but I think it's all the place there. And I agree with you that if Israel is not going to come up with something else, it is doomed, because this is also kind of a war arena which has been neglected by Israel for years. So it's just...
Thank you, Uzi. Professor Jurovics, are you with us? Can
Yes.
you unmute yourself? Thank you. I would like to ask, just referring to Leonard's report about the clashes outside the court, how does public affair influence what is going on inside the court?
Not at all. In all cases we had to face, we always had protesters in front of the court. Always, even sometimes protesters getting confused between at the time between the ICTY and the International Court, for example. So judges will not be influenced by any such thing. It does not, and I'm not here on, cannot talk on behalf of Israel. I'm here, I'm only here to give you a legal point of view. From the legal point of view, that has nothing to do with us, and that has nothing to, that there is no influence whatsoever of
Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. Thank you, Professor Yann Jurovics. Thank
pleasure.
you.
The pleasure is mine.
Lieutenant Colonel Reserve Jonathan Kornikos. Thank you, Professor Uzi Rabi. And,
thank you.
Thank you all for having the time to participate in such a short notice. Alex, will you wrap it up?
Yeah, certainly. Tal, thank you for your wonderful steering as always. Once again, thank you to our guests. Just so you know, we will be, we have recorded this briefing, and all of you who have participated will be getting a copy of it as soon as it's downloaded, and we'll make sure that that you all have that information. But from us at APA on this important day in The Hague, we thank you for your time. We hope you found it useful, and we look forward to seeing as many of you as possible on further briefings going forward. So thank you for your time, and we'll end things here. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.